judge rules in favor of white officers, until the black woman reveals she's a U.S. attorney. From the moment Maya Jefferson stepped into the courthouse, the weight of unspoken judgment clung to her like a thick fog. She was no stranger to subtle slights and sidelong glances, but nothing had prepared her for the outright hostility she faced that day. Whispers rippled through the gallery benches, fueled by rumors and prejudice. At the plaintiff's table, two uniformed officers sat with smug confidence, exchanging knowing smirks. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for favoring law enforcement, cleared his throat, preparing to address the court. But no one was ready for the truth hidden beneath Maya's composed demeanor. She was prepared. She had a powerful secret weapon that would send shockwaves through the entire courtroom. Maya Jefferson's morning had begun like any other. She had risen before dawn in her modest Brooklyn apartment, not far from the bustling intersection of Fulton and Nostrand. The soft hum of early morning traffic provided a familiar rhythm to her routine: coffee, a brisk walk to clear her mind, then a train ride into Manhattan's busy legal district. As she dressed in a pressed blouse and navy slacks, she mentally reviewed her schedule. A full docket of motions to file, briefs to review, and errands for the Department of Justice. Despite the heavy workload, she felt a quiet thrill. She loved her job and the privilege it gave her to help others, especially those often overlooked by the system. She never imagined her day would take a sharp turn simply because she had chosen to drive instead of taking the subway. A last-minute call about a legal matter in a neighboring Queens district made her opt for the flexibility of her car. Navigating the rush-hour traffic, she maneuvered cautiously past impatient drivers. Soft R&B played on the radio, the gentle melody easing her mind. She felt at peace until the sharp wail of a siren shattered the moment. In her rearview mirror, she spotted a police cruiser trailing her. Red and blue lights flashed ominously against the buildings around her. Maya's pulse quickened. Though she had done nothing wrong, a familiar unease settled in her chest. She signaled and pulled over, her heart pounding. She reminded herself to stay calm, hands visible, wait for the officer to approach, follow protocol. Yet her mind swirled with memories of countless news stories. Black motorists harassed or worse during routine stops. Moments later, two officers emerged. The first, tall and lanky, had pale skin and a mustache that drooped above thin lips. Officer Troy Miller. The second, Kevin Rower, was heavier set, his face flushed from either the wind or irritation. Both approached her car with an air of authority. Maya rolled down her window, greeting them politely, and asked why she was being stopped. Officer Miller, his tone clipped and cold, demanded her license, registration, and proof of insurance. Maya complied without hesitation, handing over her documents. She repeated her question, but Miller dismissed it with a curt wave of his hand. Rower smirked, leaning in slightly to peer inside her car. Maya tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her sense of caution intensifying. "You were speeding," Miller finally said, "doing 45 in a 30. Maya knew that wasn't true. She had been careful, keeping her speed well within the limit, watching for pedestrians and cyclists. But she also knew that arguing could escalate the situation. She took a steadying breath, weighing her words. "Officer," she replied evenly, "I'm fairly certain I was under the limit. Is there a chance you may have clocked the wrong car?" Rower rolled his eyes. "I don't make mistakes with my radar gun." "Listen, lady, are you going to give us trouble?" Maya reined in her frustration. She was used to microaggressions, but something about their demeanor suggested this was more than just a casual insult. She had to tread carefully. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," she said calmly. "I'm simply asking for clarification." Miller's thin lips curled into a sneer. He stepped back, exchanging hushed words with Rower. Though they spoke quietly, Maya caught fragments of their conversation. Something about attitude and "these people." She complied, though her anger smoldered just beneath the surface. She wasn't just any bystander. She was a rising U.S. attorney, someone who had worked relentlessly to uphold justice. She was deeply familiar with the law and the boundaries these officers were crossing. Eventually, Miller slammed the back door. "Nothing here. Let's just write her up for speeding and maybe resisting an officer." "Resisting?" Maya repeated, alarmed. "I cooperated fully." Rower smirked once more. "We'll see what the report says." The officers didn't realize they had just picked a fight with someone possessing extensive legal knowledge. Someone who, with a single phone call, could set a serious investigation into motion. But Maya kept her cards close. She wouldn't reveal her position just yet. She wanted to see how far they'd take this farce. With her heart pounding, Maya promised herself she would fight back. This injustice would not go unchallenged. As she watched the officers drive away, leaving her with a speeding summons and the threat of additional charges, she felt herself trembling. Not from fear, but from a searing fury. The calm exterior she had maintained during the encounter had been her shield, honed over years of enduring casual racism, dismissive glances, and sneering comments that chipped away at her sense of belonging. A shield she had carefully built from pride, dignity, and, most importantly, resolve. Long before Maya Jefferson had the power to prosecute cases, she was a young girl growing up in the heart of Brooklyn. Her parents, Malcolm and Loretta Jefferson, had instilled in her a deep sense of justice. Her father, a history professor at CUNY specializing in African American studies, and her mother, a social worker advocating for low-income families, made sure that dinner table conversations were filled with discussions about civil rights heroes, systemic oppression, and the fight for those unable to stand up for themselves. Maya learned from the stories of her ancestors who had marched in Selma or staged sit-ins, and from their unyielding spirit of resistance. But she also learned that real change required not just passion, but strategic thinking. When Maya was just 9 years old, she witnessed a tense argument between her uncle and a police officer who had mistreated him without cause. She remembered feeling small and powerless, tears stinging her eyes. The image of a grown man being unjustly berated never left her mind. It inspired her to pursue law, to become someone who could challenge the abuse of power at its highest levels. In high school, Maya excelled in debate club, quickly becoming known for her sharp intellect and calm demeanor under pressure. She also volunteered at a local community legal aid office, where she saw firsthand how the law could be both a sword and a shield. A kind lawyer named Sharon Fields mentored Maya, teaching her the basics of legal research and the importance of compassion. Sharon often said, "Maya, empathy. Without it, you become just another cog in a broken system." At Columbia University, Maya double-majored in political science and African American studies. She often found herself in heated seminars about systemic racism, where her personal experiences and academic research merged into a deep conviction that the justice system needed to be reformed from within. She graduated with high honors, then moved on to NYU School of Law and later secured a prestigious clerkship at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York. Her supervisors recognized her unwavering commitment to civil rights. When Maya joined the Department of Justice in the Eastern District, it felt like destiny. Over the years, Maya had cultivated a deep understanding of the law's complexities and its potential for good. She carried with her the stories of her family, her mentors, and the countless victims of injustice. She made a personal vow that if she ever encountered blatant racial discrimination, she would confront it head-on. As she headed back to her apartment after the confrontation with Officers Miller and Rower, Maya's mind churned with the memory of their sneering faces and the humiliation of being searched on the sidewalk without reason. The old rage of feeling powerless stirred to life. But this time, she wasn't a helpless child. She had the means and authority to fight back. Once home, she sat at her kitchen table, the scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. The summons lay next to her laptop like a badge of injustice. She wanted to tear it up in frustration, but she knew better. This was more than just a ticket. It was evidence. She opened her laptop and typed a brief memo summarizing the events, time, location, and the details of the officer's conduct. She noted the racist undertones, their bullying tactics, and their threat of adding false charges for resisting. Her notes were precise. Every detail mattered for a potential investigation. Then she made a call to an old friend, Marcus Reed, a fellow attorney working in a different branch of the Justice Department. Marcus had been her classmate at NYU, a brilliant litigator passionate about rooting out police misconduct. Maya didn't reveal all the details over the phone, just enough for him to understand that this was serious, something that might require federal oversight. Marcus agreed to help in any way he could. Throughout the evening, Maya's emotions fluctuated between simmering anger and resolute determination. She thought of her parents, who had always stood up for what was right. She thought of Sharon Fields, who had taught her the power of empathy and strategy. She thought of all the people who had been in her position, lacking the resources or knowledge to fight back. She refused to let this incident be buried. "Tomorrow," she whispered aloud, locking her notes in her home safe. "Tomorrow, I take the first step." Morning sunlight filtered through Maya's window, casting a soft glow across her living room. She woke feeling more determined than ever, though a gnawing unease lingered about what might come next. She was accustomed to legal battles unfolding behind stacks of briefs and motions, not on the side of a city street in front of random onlookers. Nevertheless, she was ready to face the situation. After showering and dressing in a sharp navy suit, Maya carefully organized her documents. She had a meeting later that afternoon regarding another case, but her mind kept returning to how she would handle the incident with Officers Miller and Rower. Her phone buzzed. Marcus confirmed their lunchtime meeting at a nearby cafe. Maya exhaled, relieved to have support from a friend who understood the nuances of federal law and the complexities of racial profiling cases. She locked her apartment door behind her and took the subway, partly to avoid any additional encounters with local law enforcement. Upon arriving at the Department of Justice building, Maya passed through security with her usual professional smile, though inside, she was preparing herself. She carried the summons in a neat envelope, tucked securely under her arm. Her afternoon was filled with meetings and phone calls until finally, noon arrived. She slipped out to the bustling cafe where Marcus was waiting. He stood to greet her, his expression concerned. Marcus was a tall man with a warm smile, though now, that warmth was subdued as he looked at Maya. They ordered coffee and sandwiches, then sat by a window overlooking the street, where midday traffic rumbled by. Maya recounted the entire story: the supposed speeding violation, the forced car search, the humiliating pat-down, and the officer's racist undertones. Marcus listened intently, his brows furrowing. By the time she finished, he seemed as outraged as she was. "These guys have no idea who they're dealing with," he said softly but firmly. "But it's bigger than that. This is exactly what we talk about all the time: abuse of power under the guise of law enforcement." Maya nodded. "I'm worried they'll file a false report or escalate things. They mentioned resisting arrest. If they put that on record, it could damage my reputation. Even if I can clear my name, I don't want to think about how it could harm others they stop." Marcus agreed. "Exactly. We need to be strategic. Are you thinking of reporting this to Internal Affairs or going straight to the Civil Rights Division?" "I'm thinking both," Maya replied, tapping her pen on the table. "I can also file a formal complaint through the city's Civilian Complaint Review Board, but I want to wait and see if they actually file any official charges. If they do, I'll reveal my credentials in court if necessary." Marcus hesitated. "That would be a bombshell, but Maya, be careful. Some judges hate surprises in their courtroom. Then again, if the judge is in on it." "Well, you said these guys are known for intimidation," Maya replied. "Maybe they have connections." Maya's jaw tightened. "I'll handle it. Right now, I'm going to gather more evidence. I'm sure there were bystanders who recorded some of it on their phones. I'm going to see if I can track down any witness statements." After lunch, Maya returned to her office. She spent part of the afternoon scouring social media, searching hashtags and local neighborhood pages to see if any videos of her encounter had been posted. She found one short clip on Twitter, showing Officer Rower pushing her against the side of her car, while Officer Miller rummaged through the back seat. The video wasn't long, but it clearly showed Maya as calm and cooperative, with no sign of resistance. Maya downloaded the clip immediately, carefully documenting its source. Just as she finished labeling the video file, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, unknown number. She hesitated, but something told her to answer. "Hello?" she said. Silence crackled for a moment before a gruff voice spoke. "Miss Maya Jefferson?" Her pulse quickened. "Yes. This is Detective Brian Costello with NYPD Internal Affairs. I received a message from Marcus Reed about an incident involving officers Troy Miller and Kevin Rower. I'd like to meet with you." Maya's heart lifted slightly. She hadn't expected an internal affairs detective to contact her so quickly, but it was a promising sign. "Of course, detective. When's good for you?" The detective suggested the following morning at a small conference room in NYPD headquarters. Maya agreed and ended the call with a glimmer of hope. Someone within the system was willing to investigate. Yet that evening, as Maya was preparing dinner in her small kitchen, she received another unexpected call. This time, it was from an NYPD desk officer, informing her that there was now a warrant for her arrest on charges of resisting arrest and obstruction. The news hit her like a punch to the gut. She nearly dropped her phone. The officer stated that Maya was required to report to the local precinct or face additional penalties. Her mind raced. They had actually done it. They twisted the story to paint her as the aggressor. She cursed under her breath, panic mixing with fury. Then she remembered who she was. She inhaled, steadying herself. This wasn't just intimidation. This was a calculated move to scare her and tarnish her record before she could proceed with her complaint. If she were arrested, even briefly, a mugshot and a public record could follow her for years. For a moment, Maya felt a wave of despair, but then she collected herself. She was not alone, and she had the truth. Grabbing her keys, her documents, and a charged phone, she marched out the door, ready to confront the precinct armed with the one weapon that truly mattered: her legal knowledge. By the time Maya arrived at the 78th precinct in Brooklyn, late evening had fallen. The building's cold brick exterior loomed under flickering streetlights. She parked her car and took a moment to compose herself. Going through mental checklists of the law, her breath came rapidly, betraying the nerves she tried to mask beneath her professional demeanor. When Maya stepped into the station, the stale odor of sweat and old coffee hit her senses. Officers were scattered about, some handling paperwork, others chatting idly. The moment she approached the counter, heads turned. She informed the desk sergeant that she was there regarding a warrant. The desk sergeant, a graying man with tired eyes, seemed puzzled at first, perhaps not expecting the subject of a warrant to walk in so calmly. He told her to wait. Maya settled into a plastic chair under flickering fluorescent lights, ignoring the suspicious glares from some officers. After what felt like an agonizing half-hour, a young officer led her to a small interrogation room. Its cinder block walls were painted a dull off-white, and a single overhead light buzzed faintly. She placed her documents on the table, her heart thumping in her chest. Shortly after, Detective Brian Costello entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard. Maya recognized his voice from the phone call. He gave her a nod that was somewhere between professional courtesy and sympathy. "Miss Jefferson, thank you for coming in," he said. "I understand there's a warrant out for your arrest, but I also spoke with Marcus Reed, who said you have information that might clear this up." Maya handed him the summons for speeding, the short Twitter video clip on a USB drive, and the notes she'd taken about the encounter. He skimmed them briefly, frowning. Detective Costello scratched his chin and leaned forward. "This is serious," he said. "Officers Miller and Rower filed a report claiming you resisted, tried to flee, and verbally threatened them." "That's a lie," Maya said, working to keep her voice steady. She tapped the USB. "That clip shows part of the stop. I didn't resist. If anything, they were the aggressors." Costello exhaled. "I'm not the judge here, but I can see there's more to this than meets the eye. For formality's sake, we have to process you, but I'll do it discreetly. Then we can start an investigation. I'll ask the district attorney's office to hold off on pressing charges until we've reviewed everything." Maya's heart sank at the thought of being processed. She nodded, though understanding the protocol. "All right," she managed. He escorted her through a series of hallways. Maya's cheeks burned with humiliation as she was fingerprinted and briefly photographed, though Costello assured her she would not be handcuffed. The entire ordeal felt surreal. Here she was, an assistant U.S. attorney with an unblemished record, being treated like a criminal. She forced herself to breathe, reminding herself this was temporary, and justice could still prevail. After what seemed like an eternity, Costello returned her belongings and guided her to a quieter office space, away from curious eyes. There, Maya recounted her story again, in detail. Everything from the moment she saw the flashing lights to the officer's sneering remarks and the baseless search of her vehicle. Costello took copious notes. "I'll need to interview them separately," he said. "But let's be clear. If they claimed you resisted and you have video evidence to the contrary, this could be a serious case of falsified reports." "It's not just about me," Maya said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "This is likely a pattern. If they did it to me, they could be doing it to countless others who don't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back." Costello paused, then nodded. "I understand. I'll do my part, but keep in mind that this precinct tends to close ranks. Not everyone is going to be happy I'm looking into it." Maya thanked him for his honesty. By the time she left the station, her emotions were torn between relief at having found a potential ally and outrage at the system's willingness to protect bad actors. She returned home in the early hours, exhausted, her mind racing with potential next steps. She needed to inform her superiors at the Department of Justice. An actual arrest record, no matter how unfounded, would raise questions. But if there was ever a test of the system she believed in, this was it. Sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake, replaying the precinct scene over and over. The cold demands for her fingerprints, the flash of the camera capturing her mugshot. She felt an unfamiliar vulnerability, tempered only by her unwavering resolve. One thought circled in her mind. Let them see me in court. Let them see who I really am. And when that moment came, she would not hold back. The summons and the warrant demanded that Maya appear in criminal court just 1 week later. In that short span, Maya hired a private defense lawyer, an ironic twist, given her own role as a federal prosecutor. She chose a seasoned attorney named Stella Morano, known for her expertise in wrongful arrests and civil rights cases. Stella was a fiery advocate who had taken on NYPD officers before and won. On the morning of the hearing, Maya dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray skirt suit. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair. A soft twist pinned at the nape of her neck, reflecting the controlled fury simmering inside her. She refused to walk into that courtroom looking disheveled or intimidated. She was determined to hold her head high. Stella picked her up, and together they traveled to Kings County Criminal Court in downtown Brooklyn. The building's cavernous interior buzzed with the daily chaos of arraignments and hearings. Lawyers scurrying with thick case files, defendants in cheap suits pacing nervously, and stoic officers watching from the corners. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and tension. As Maya and Stella entered the courtroom, Maya's pulse quickened. She recognized the presiding judge from local headlines, Judge Alan Harrison. He was rumored to be tough on defendants and notoriously deferential. To law enforcement, he rarely questioned police testimony, even when there were contradictions. Rumor had it that complaints of racial bias often fell on deaf ears in his courtroom. Before their case was called, Maya glanced at the front row of benches, where Officers Miller and Rower sat. Their uniforms were crisp, expressions smug. Their attorney, a stern-faced district attorney named Caroline Whitaker, whispered something to them, prompting laughter from Rower. Maya swallowed her anger, her heart racing. She reminded herself of her father's words. Never lose your composure in the face of injustice. That's when they gain power over you. Finally, the court clerk called Maya's case. Stella walked forward, Maya by her side. A hush fell over the room. Judge Harrison flipped through the file, his face unreadable. Caroline Whitaker stood first, outlining the charges of resisting arrest, obstruction of governmental administration, and disorderly conduct. She claimed Maya had become belligerent during a lawful traffic stop, refused to comply with officer instructions, and even attempted to flee. At that last statement, Maya nearly scoffed in disbelief. Stella placed a steady hand on her arm, signaling her to remain composed. Once Caroline finished, Stella cleared her throat and stepped forward. "Your Honor," Stella began, her voice calm but firm, "my client categorically denies these charges. We have video evidence, brief but crucial, that contradicts the officer's account. Miss Jefferson not only cooperated fully, but she was subjected to an improper search and humiliating treatment." Judge Harrison peered over his reading glasses. "Video evidence?" he asked. "Is it from a body cam?" "It's from a bystander," Stella replied. "Shot on a cell phone and posted online. We have the original file as well." Caroline interjected. "Your Honor, I'd caution reliance on shaky cell phone videos. There's no guarantee of authenticity. My officers have clean records, and the official police report states the defendant resisted. We have no reason to doubt their testimony." Judge Harrison frowned slightly. "I'll allow the video, but it must be verified. For now, we'll proceed with the arraignment. Miss Jefferson, how do you plead?" Stella spoke before Maya could respond. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Harrison made a note. "Very well. Let's schedule a preliminary hearing to review the evidence." He glanced up at Maya for the first time, his gaze lingering. Maya felt an unsettling chill, as if he were assessing more than just her posture. "Bail is set at $55,000. Next matter." Maya's cheeks flushed with indignation at the thought of bail for such a charge, but Stella had prepared for this. She posted bail immediately. As Maya turned to leave, her eyes met Officer Miller's. He smirked, his lips mouthing words she couldn't fully decipher, but she recognized the contempt. She forced herself to turn away. Out in the hallway, Stella led her to a bench. "This is going to be an uphill battle with Harrison on the bench," Stella sighed. "And that DA Whitaker. She's got a reputation for defending the police at all costs." Maya stared at the drab walls of the corridor, her mind racing. "I'm not backing down," she said. "I need to speak with the Civil Rights Division. This could become a federal matter." Stella nodded. "I agree. The moment you reveal your position with the DOJ, it'll change the game. But do you want to tip your hand so soon?" Maya paused, considering. "Not yet," she said finally. "I need more evidence, more insight into these officers' track records. And if Harrison tries to railroad this, we'll see about moving it to federal court." Stella agreed, and they parted ways after scheduling a strategy meeting. Maya walked out of the courthouse with an uneasy mix of anger and steely resolve. The subtle slights, the humiliating pat-down, the malicious charges. None of it would deter her. She pulled out her phone to call Marcus, telling him the next steps. She also planned to talk to a contact at the Civil Rights Division, laying the groundwork for a potential investigation into these officers. As she stepped onto the bustling street, Maya felt the wind on her face, a reminder of her freedom and her will. She thought about how many others, less equipped than she, might have been crushed by this system. A silent promise echoed in her mind. She would not be broken. She would fight this injustice head-on. And when the time was right, she would let them know exactly who they were dealing with. After the initial court appearance, Maya dove headfirst into gathering more evidence. She and Stella constructed a meticulous defense strategy, guided by Maya's unique insider knowledge of how prosecutors operate. During her free hours, late into the night, she pored over case law, studied previous complaints against officers Miller and Rower, and analyzed the local precinct's record of misconduct allegations. Marcus put Maya in touch with Samira Green, a staff attorney at the New York Civil Liberties Union who specialized in police accountability. Over a cup of coffee at a local diner, Maya shared the details of her case. Samira provided Maya with a wealth of insights into Miller and Rower's histories. They had been named in at least 3 prior complaints for excessive force, though none had resulted in formal discipline. The complaints had all been dismissed for lack of evidence. Samira sighed, pushing the files toward Maya. "The pattern's there," she said. "We just need to prove it conclusively, and since you have that video, that's a start." Maya thumbed through the documents, her heart pounding. She saw statements from individuals who claimed they'd been harassed or manhandled by Miller and Rower. She frowned, her eyes scanning lines about unlawful searches, intimidation, and racial slurs. The language of the complainants varied, but the core allegations were disturbingly similar. The officers targeted people of color during traffic stops and escalated encounters without clear justification. Why weren't any of these complaints upheld? Maya asked quietly, though she had an inkling of the answer. Samira rolled her eyes. You know how it goes. Witnesses can't be located. Internal Affairs finds some technical reason to dismiss them, or the judge gives the officers the benefit of the doubt. It's a systemic issue. Maya clenched her jaw. Well, maybe this time it'll be different. Samira smiled, a trace of optimism breaking through her exhaustion. It might be. You have the credentials and you clearly know how to navigate the system. Just be cautious. The pushback might get ugly. Armed with these files, Maya returned to her office at the Department of Justice. She walked a fine line. She hadn't officially disclosed her situation to her direct supervisors, fearing they might remove her from active cases or, worse, question her ability to remain unbiased. Still, she confided in one colleague, Jennifer Roble, who had become a close friend over the years. Jennifer listened attentively as Maya laid out the events. This is insane, Jennifer said, pacing the office. These officers clearly picked the wrong person to harass. But, Maya, you've got to protect yourself. The moment they find out you're a federal attorney, it could escalate. Maya nodded. I know, but if I reveal it at the right time, it might scare them into dropping the case or possibly open them up to federal charges. She hesitated, then added, I just hope the judge doesn't dismiss me outright because of some bias. Jennifer folded her arms. If he does, you file a motion to recuse him or transfer. You've got the law on your side. And if that fails, well, the Civil Rights Division might open a full-blown investigation. That possibility lifted Maya's spirits. The Department of Justice had, in recent years, become more active in investigating police departments for patterns of unlawful conduct. If Maya could present compelling evidence, perhaps the DOJ would step in. She had no illusions that it could take months, if not years, to see real accountability, but she was prepared for the long haul. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of legal motions. Stella filed a motion to dismiss the charges, citing contradictory evidence in the police report and the cell phone footage. Meanwhile, Maya quietly reached out to the bystander who had filmed the stop. The woman, Kesha Brown, was initially hesitant to get involved, but once Maya explained the stakes, Kesha agreed to provide a sworn statement. Her affidavit described the entire incident, emphasizing that Maya never raised her voice, never physically resisted, and complied with every order the officers gave. Kesha recounted hearing the officers mutter demeaning comments about Maya being one of those loud mouths and acting above her station. Though the statements weren't overtly racial on the video, the undertones were unmistakable. Maya's gut twisted as she read it. It was the same kind of ugly prejudice she had felt in every glare and every mocking sneer from Miller and Rower. Finally, the day of the preliminary hearing arrived. Maya, Stella, and Marcus walked into the courthouse armed with sworn statements, video evidence, and a stack of the officers' past complaints. Maya felt the anxious energy crackling through her. This was the moment where she might expose them or, at least, plant doubt in the judge's mind. But one question still gnawed at her. Would Judge Harrison actually consider the evidence fairly? She took her seat at the defense table. Across the aisle, the prosecution team, led by Caroline Whitaker, sat with the officers. Whitaker wore a self-assured expression, as though she already had the judge's verdict in her pocket. Miller and Rower stared directly at Maya, arms folded, as if daring her to meet their gaze. Maya didn't flinch. She inhaled, clasped her hands, and reminded herself she wasn't just fighting for her own vindication. She was fighting for every person who had been silenced or discredited by officers like Miller and Rower. As the court clerk called the case, Maya's eyes flicked to the judge's bench. Harrison stepped in, robe flowing. He cleared his throat, ready to begin. Maya's pulse pounded in her ears. Whatever happened next could determine if the truth would finally come to light or if the system's ingrained bias would crush her too. The preliminary hearing opened with formalities. Judge Harrison, his expression stony, ordered both sides to present their arguments. Caroline Whitaker rose to the lectern first, methodically outlining the police narrative. Maya allegedly refused multiple commands, acted aggressively, and impeded the officer's lawful investigation. Whitaker described Maya's behavior in hyperbolic terms, painting her as an out-of-control individual who had no respect for law enforcement. Maya's stomach churned at the lies, but she schooled her features into neutrality. Next, Stella took the floor with measured confidence. She introduced the cell phone video, playing it for the court. The short clip showed Maya calmly standing by her car while Officer Rower forcibly patted her down. There was no sign of aggression on Maya's part. In the background, snippets of the officer's snide comments could be heard, albeit faintly. Stella pointed out the lack of any audible commands from the officers that Maya allegedly refused. Judge Harrison leaned forward, peering at the screen. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, passed across his face before it hardened again. Once the video ended, Stella called Kesha Brown to the stand. Kesha testified that she had recorded the video and witnessed the incident from start to finish. She emphasized that Maya never resisted or obstructed. She also recounted hearing one officer call Maya a loudmouth, though she couldn't identify which one specifically. Whitaker rose for cross-examination, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Miss Brown, could you have missed something while filming? Isn't it possible Miss Jefferson resisted before you started recording?" "No," Kesha replied firmly, meeting Whitaker's gaze. "I started recording the moment I saw them pull her out of the car. She didn't struggle or yell." Whitaker pressed further. "But you only captured a few seconds of the incident. There could have been more." Kesha stood firm. "I watched the entire thing from across the street. She was calm the whole time." When Kesha stepped down, Stella introduced the complaint records against Officers Miller and Rower. Whitaker objected, arguing that they were irrelevant. Judge Harrison frowned, seemingly leaning toward agreeing with Whitaker for a moment. Maya feared he might dismiss the evidence entirely, but Stella argued that the officer's history of similar complaints revealed a pattern of misconduct. Harrison permitted a brief discussion of the records, but only as context, refusing to allow them to overshadow the current case. Caroline Whitaker then called Officer Miller to testify. He spoke in a terse tone, detailing how Maya allegedly refused to comply by questioning their authority. He described Maya as enraged, claiming she had screamed and made threats. Maya's frustration mounted. None of it was true. Then Rower took the stand, echoing Miller's statements. Both stuck to their version of events, doubling down on Maya's alleged aggression throughout their testimony. Maya sensed Judge Harrison's patience wearing thin, but not necessarily with the officers. The judge seemed irritated that the defense would dare challenge law enforcement's account of events. His tone became sharper each time Stella objected or asked pointed questions. Finally, Stella informed the court that Maya herself wished to testify. Maya stood, smoothing her suit jacket, and walked to the witness stand, her nerves dancing in her stomach. She glanced at the judge, who regarded her with a trace of disapproval, perhaps anticipating an emotional plea. But Maya had no intention of making a spectacle. She was there to tell the truth. Under Stella's questioning, Maya recounted the stop with calm precision. She clarified that she had never resisted and had only asked about the reason for the search. Stella guided her to explain how the officers escalated the situation. Then came the cross-examination. Caroline Whitaker approached, eyes cold. "Miss Jefferson," she began, "is it true that you questioned the officer's decision to stop you and conduct a search?" Maya nodded. "Yes, I asked why I was being searched. That's not illegal. I never refused to comply." Whitaker's lips curved slightly. "But you did speak back to them, correct? You didn't remain silent." Maya resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "Asking questions is not resisting, counselor." Whitaker's voice grew more severe. "Isn't it possible that you were irritated and hostile? Perhaps the officers perceived your tone as threatening." Maya took a controlled breath. "I used a calm tone the entire time, which is clear from the video. The officer's perception doesn't match the actual footage." At that point, Maya felt a surge of adrenaline. This was her moment. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, if I may, there's additional context regarding my understanding of the law during that stop." Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "What context is that?" Maya looked him squarely in the eye. "I am an assistant U.S. attorney with the Department of Justice, Eastern District of New York." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Stella stood a bit taller. Whitaker's eyes widened for a moment before narrowing. Miller and Rower exchanged stunned looks. Judge Harrison's face froze for a brief moment. The tension in the air was palpable, as though the very walls of the courtroom were struck dumb by the revelation. Maya continued, her voice steady. "I didn't reveal my position at the time of the stop to avoid any conflict of interest or the appearance of impropriety. But I am deeply familiar with the constitutional standards regarding search and seizure. I knew I was in the right, and I complied anyway because I feared for my safety. The officers were aggressive and made demeaning remarks. That is the full truth of this matter." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. The revelation was a bombshell. Judge Harrison blinked rapidly, attempting to regain his composure. Whitaker stammered, "Well, Your Honor, her position doesn't grant her immunity from the law. She's still—" But Harrison raised a hand, his eyes flicking between Maya and the officers. "Indeed it does not," he said carefully, "but it certainly adds weight to her understanding of the situation." The courtroom buzzed like an electrical current. Maya felt the shift in the air, an undeniable pivot in the power dynamics. The racist officers and the skeptical judge had just discovered that the woman they tried to railroad wasn't merely a random defendant. She was someone who could navigate the federal system, and that single fact changed everything. The revelation of Maya's position as a U.S. attorney triggered a cascade of events. Within 24 hours, a wave of internal and external scrutiny descended on the NYPD. Detective Brian Costello, who had previously been cautious, now had the political backing to dig deeper into Miller and Rower's conduct. Meanwhile, Maya's supervisors at the Department of Justice, once made aware of the situation, convened a special meeting to discuss whether the DOJ should launch a formal civil rights investigation. In the days following the preliminary hearing, Maya witnessed a stark change in the courtroom's atmosphere. Judge Harrison, who had been aloof and somewhat dismissive, became notably more measured in his tone. During a subsequent motion hearing, he referred to Maya as Counsel Jefferson, acknowledging her legal standing in a way that subtly signaled the playing field had shifted. Miller and Rower, seated at the prosecution's table, looked less smug. They seemed to sense the tide turning against them. Outside the courtroom, Maya's life was upended. Reporters, alerted by the public court transcripts, swarmed the courthouse entrance. They sensed a headline, "U.S. Attorney accuses NYPD officers of racial profiling." Maya tried to avoid the cameras, ducking into cabs or side exits to escape the throng of microphones. She wasn't seeking publicity, only justice. But in a city as vast and media-driven as New York, such sensational details didn't stay quiet for long. Her superiors at the DOJ were equally concerned about the optics. Assistant Attorney General Vanessa Castillo summoned Maya to a private office for an extended conversation. Castillo, a composed woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, eyed Maya carefully over the rim of her glasses. "I've reviewed the court transcripts," Castillo said, folding her hands atop the file in front of her. "This is a delicate situation. You understand that?" "Yes," Maya nodded, bracing herself. "Yes, ma'am." Castillo's gaze softened slightly. "First, I want to say how sorry I am that you had to endure such treatment. We take allegations of misconduct seriously, but as you know, whenever a DOJ attorney is involved in a personal legal matter that reflects on law enforcement, it complicates things. We have to ensure there's no conflict of interest." "I understand," Maya replied, her voice steady. "I'm not asking the DOJ to represent me personally, only to look into these officers if the evidence warrants a civil rights investigation." Castillo leaned back, tapping a pen against her desk. "Detective Costello from NYPD Internal Affairs has already been in contact. The Civil Rights Division is reviewing your complaint and the prior complaints against these officers. There's also the possibility of a pattern and practice investigation into the precinct if we find credible evidence that this is systemic. Maya felt a surge of hope. So the department is taking it seriously? Yes, but… Castillo paused, her tone more serious. Be prepared. This will likely get messy. The local police union may retaliate, media coverage could intensify, and there's always the risk of a conflict between federal and local authorities. Maya steeled herself. I'm ready. Once she left Castillo's office, Maya exhaled, feeling a little lighter. For years, she had worked on behalf of the government, often prosecuting financial crimes or assisting with civil rights cases from an institutional standpoint. Now the institution was compelled to examine one of its most entrenched partnerships, local law enforcement. As the investigation gained traction, Maya spent hours with federal investigators, detailing her incident, providing the video evidence, and turning over the records Samira Green had shared. Detective Costello also ramped up interviews. He spoke with Kisha Brown, the other complainants, and local witnesses who had negative encounters with Miller and Rower. Rumors swirled that these officers were part of a clique within the precinct, known for targeting minorities with spurious traffic stops to meet quotas. Maya thought about all the people who might have suffered in silence. Now their voices had a chance to be heard. Meanwhile, the legal case against Maya didn't magically disappear. Whitaker stubbornly refused to drop the charges, perhaps out of fear that doing so would confirm wrongdoing. A court date loomed for the next hearing, during which Stella planned to present the new findings from the DOJ investigation, hoping to have the charges dismissed outright. Tensions ran high. Maya noticed her phone vibrating with unknown callers more frequently and began receiving anonymous voicemails, some supportive, others threatening. Marcus advised her to be cautious, and Maya started varying her routine, staying vigilant whenever she traveled, especially at night. Relief washed over Maya like a wave. Stella squeezed her hand, a ripple of low chatter coursing through the gallery. Whitaker's shoulders sagged, and she turned to whisper furiously at Miller and Rower. The officers looked stunned, their faces washed with the realization that they were no longer in control of the narrative. Harrison rapped his gavel for order. Furthermore, he continued, I am ordering the record of Miss Jefferson's arrest to be expunged. There shall be no criminal record associated with this incident. This court is adjourned. He rose and exited quickly, leaving the room abuzz. Maya wanted to shout with relief, but she kept her composure. Within moments, reporters flooded the aisles, peppering her with questions. Stella shielded Maya, leading her toward the corridor as cameras flashed. Outside the courthouse, Maya finally allowed herself to breathe. She glanced up at the sky, the bright sun a welcome contrast to weeks of looming dark clouds. Marcus joined them, a broad grin splitting his face. This is huge, he said, clapping Maya on the shoulder. They never thought this day would come. Still, Maya felt a pang in her chest. Those officers might face disciplinary action, but how many others like them were still out there? We'll keep shining the light, Stella said. That's how you root out corruption, one case at a time. Within days, the police commissioner announced that Miller and Rower would be suspended without pay, pending a formal departmental trial on allegations of falsifying records and violating protocol. Detective Costello had recommended they be charged with perjury for lying on official documents. The district attorney's office, reeling from the scandal, faced mounting pressure to prosecute the officers or risk further public outcry. For Maya, the victory was bittersweet. She'd exposed two bad cops, but the experience had laid bare the magnitude of the struggle. Racist policing wasn't an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a broader illness. Nonetheless, she had proven that with unwavering determination and the right resources, justice could prevail against entrenched power. The karmic backlash came swiftly for Miller and Rower, and it was well-deserved. In the weeks that followed, Maya supported the Civil Rights Division's deeper investigation into the precinct. Some officers cooperated, emboldened to speak out about the discriminatory practices they had witnessed. Others remained silent or defensive. Still, the tide seemed to be turning, at least a bit, toward accountability. Late one evening, Maya sat in her kitchen, nursing a cup of chamomile tea while scrolling through the day's news. Headlines blared about the scandal, the suspended officers, and the possibility of broader reforms. She set her phone down, exhaustion pulling at her, but also a spark of hope. She had walked through the fire and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger and more resolute. If the system could be swayed to protect one innocent person, perhaps with continued pressure, it could protect many more. Maya Jefferson would do everything in her power to ensure that, because sometimes karma needed a helping hand, and she was more than willing to provide it. A month passed since the charges against Maya were dismissed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Though she returned to her usual duties at the Department of Justice, things were far from normal. Her story had sparked a wide conversation about racial profiling and police accountability. Community groups hosted forums, inviting Maya to speak. She accepted when she could, standing before crowds of concerned citizens to share her experience. Each time she spoke, she emphasized she was not anti-police. She was pro-justice. The applause and cheers fueled her determination. Meanwhile, the attorney cleared his throat. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. My clients, Officers Miller and Rower, are willing to accept disciplinary measures if you drop any pursuit of federal charges. They claim they never intended for this to escalate the way it did." Maya felt a cold anger coil in her. So now they're sorry? Now that they're facing real consequences? She shook her head. That's not how accountability works. Besides, I don't control the DOJ's decisions on federal charges. The department will decide based on the evidence. Her refusal left the attorney crestfallen. He pleaded for some leniency, but Maya offered none. She pointed out the systemic nature of the abuse, how many complaints had been dismissed or swept aside until her case forced the truth into the light. A genuine apology could have happened any time before they falsified reports and tried to ruin her life. Now it was too late to bargain for a quick escape. A week later, the departmental trial concluded. The verdict came down swiftly. Both officers were fired from the NYPD. The internal panel recommended that the district attorney file criminal charges for perjury and falsification of official documents. The city roiled in debate. Some hailed the decision as justice. Others claimed it was a witch hunt against the police. But Maya knew this was just the beginning. Real justice would require continued vigilance. In the wake of the verdict, Maya stood on the steps of City Hall, addressing a crowd of reporters. Cameras zoomed in as she spoke. This was never about personal revenge. It's about ensuring the law applies equally to everyone, regardless of race or rank. I have respect for the many good officers who serve our community, but we cannot tolerate abuse of power. We must hold bad actors accountable to protect the integrity of law enforcement and the safety of all citizens. Her words were carried by local news channels and, eventually, national media outlets. Discussions ignited across social platforms about policing, racism, and the need for reform. Maya's case became a rallying cry, cited in op-eds and talk shows. Lawmakers hinted at new legislation to strengthen oversight committees. Emboldened citizens filed complaints without fear, believing their voices might finally be heard. Through it all, Maya maintained her day job at the DOJ, quietly handling her caseload. She never flaunted her newfound fame. Instead, she invested her energy into community outreach, pushing for policy changes at every level of the justice system. She collaborated with civil rights groups, forging alliances that extended beyond the borders of New York. Reflecting on her journey one quiet evening, Maya thought back to that fateful morning when she was pulled over, just an ordinary citizen who happened to be black and behind the wheel. She remembered the fear, the anger, the sense of violation. But she also recalled the spark of resolve, the determination to fight for what was right. She'd been tested, and though the scars remained, she emerged stronger. Her story became part of a larger tapestry of resistance and reform, a reminder that sometimes the most profound change begins with a single injustice that cannot be ignored. In her heart, Maya held on to the hope that the resonance of her fight would inspire others. That when faced with adversity, people would remember her story and realize that the law could be a powerful weapon for good, if wielded by those who refuse to be silent. And so ends the extraordinary journey of Maya Jefferson, the unassuming black woman who dared to stand against injustice and emerged as a beacon of hope. Her fight was never about vanity or revenge, but about proving that no one, no matter their color, status, or station in life, should be silenced by the very system meant to protect them. As Maya continues her work within the Department of Justice, her story resonates through neighborhoods and courtrooms alike, reminding us that truth, backed by determination, can shatter even the strongest walls of bigotry and bias. If you found power and inspiration in Maya's story, don't let it stop here. Be sure to like this video, share it with those who need hope, and subscribe for more stories that shine a light on hidden truths. Together, we can push for real change, one voice, one story, one step at a time. Meet Maya Jefferson, a poised, intelligent black woman who seemed an easy target for two racist cops. At first glance, they thought she was just another helpless driver they could bully and frame. But little did they know, hidden behind Maya's calm demeanor lay a fiery resolve and a staggering secret. She was a U.S. attorney. This is the story of how Maya turned the tables on a broken system, facing off against corrupt officers and a jaded judge. Prepare for shocking revelations, courtroom showdowns, and a soul-stirring triumph that would echo across the nation. Buckle up, justice is about to be served.